Hello and welcome to this conversation on caring for caregivers. I'm Santo Marabella, and I'm really happy to have some friends with me today to talk about their experiences with caregiving. So let me ask them to introduce themselves and whatever you'd like to say about yourself, your name, your if you work outside the home, what you do, and a connection to us or to us is fine too. And then we'll get into your experience with caregiving. So first, let me welcome Amanda Redwine. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, I'm a Floridian now. I was an accountant for 20 years, and I actually am a therapist now. And a lot of that came directly as a result of my caregiving experience. I have a son who's 21 who has Asperger's. Um, and my second caregiving experience that I'm bringing today is I spent 5 months caring for my mother as she was dying.
I understand. Well, we're so glad to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Kathy? Kathy Manley?
Hi, I'm Kathy. I work at Tower Health in the accounts payable department as a clerk. I spent 7 years as a certified nurse aide after caring for both my parents and my grandmother.
Thanks. And we have Chris Bucalo. Hi,
Yeah,
Chris.
good morning, everybody. So I'm Chris, and I'm from the Reading area. But about 3 years ago, I took a job in the DC area and moved down to between Baltimore and Washington. And that left me with I was already the only person in the area to help with my dad, who was 95. But I took that on from now afar, and that's when things declined. Of course, that's what you expect, right? As soon as you move away, a couple hours away, then everything happens. But it's been really challenging, and I'll talk about it as we go forward here in two phases. The first frenetic phase to try to coordinate everything, and then the phase we're in now, which is more of a steady state, which I'll talk more about why that happened. But good to be with you all today.
Thanks, Chris. And just to fill in my gap, my contribution, I had became the primary caregiver for both my parents. Probably started around 2015 as they got more dependent on care. Moved back home 2019 and uh, helped them and with our caregiver. We had another caregiver who was amazing and helped them until they transitioned, until they passed. So let's talk a little bit more about and again, this is a conversation, so please feel free to interject and add to it. I when you're not talking, it's okay to have it on mute. I may have muted some of you, but just unmute yourself. It is fine. It just helps when you're not talking. So let's talk about the specifics of your caregiving. Amanda, I know you said you had two caregiving experiences. Want to tell us a little bit about the context for those?
They were radically different. I'll start with my son. He was not diagnosed until he was 13. So, and he got diagnosed as a result of he had a mental health crisis and sent me a photograph or video of cutting his wrist. And so off we went into the most isolating experience of my life. Um, Went to the emergency room. He did inpatient care for 10 days. They drugged him. And they said, oh, okay, he can go back to school. And I thought, no, he cannot. He hasn't learned any skills. Nothing has fundamentally changed. So we ended up sending him to wilderness therapy in Utah at a place called Red Cliff Ascent. Um, and they saved my kid's life. And knowing that he was safe and getting help saved mine too. From there, we did a neuropsych assessment, which is where we learned he was on the spectrum, and then sent him to a therapeutic boarding school, specifically for young men 13 to 18 with Asperger's. So it was a very narrow niche. And I would go out to these parent seminars, I don't know, 4 times a year, 5 times a year. And looking in the eyes of these caregivers, I felt like I had found my flock, because you don't put your kid out of your house without a whole lot of thought and sacrifice and trauma. So the program was very focused on the boys, but nobody was taking care of the parents. And I realized that we needed to take care of the whole family system. So on a lark, I took 1 graduate class in counseling, and now here I am, never to look back at accounting.
That's quite the switch, right?
Yeah, yeah. So he came home when he was 17 and finished high school. He is away at college right now with some accommodations. But he's at in his associates and in his senior up to his senior year, his GPA is like 3.7. It's higher than mine was. So, what can I complain about? But also, he is always going to struggle with gainful employment. And so that's kind of a caregiving thing that doesn't end, around, okay, what does this look like in terms of guardianship or an inheritance for him? Would we want to give him any money in the event that I passed, or would we want to have that controlled? And that's something a lot of special needs parents struggle with. So on the whole, I would keep those problems all day long.
Yeah.
My mother, on the other hand, lived in California during COVID, and she lived in an assisted living. And so they were locked down, so I couldn't visit her for a long time. I went to see her in June of 2021, and I noticed that she was not doing well. By that point, I got access to her medical records, and so I knew that she was going to see an oncologist for blood transfusions. The way she related to me was that she was having iron infusions, that she was anemic, but she didn't really understand the nature of her condition. And I was watching her blood tests and seeing that the transfusions were occurring more and more frequently, and her numbers were rebounding less and less. So in June, I went out there and I said, okay, so 0 to 100, how badly do you need me out here? Because I was living in Illinois. And her answer was 25. And 100 was like, get in my spare room and never leave. And 0 was, I'll see you at Christmas. So I was kind of taken aback by that. So then we kind of started in stages of going to visit her. So I started going every 6 weeks, and then every 4 weeks. And then in September, it became obvious that it was time. So my wife and I moved out to California thinking that she might pass before Christmas. But she ultimately did not pass until the middle of March. So we got a really nice 5-month victory tour, if you will, of letting her visit with her friends. And so it was a really powerful experience, and I left there with absolutely no regrets.
That's wonderful. That's one of the lessons in my book, The Lessons of Caring. And I will take us a moment now and then to share with folks if I can find it quickly enough, probably not, where you can get this book. It's called The Lessons of Caring. I wrote the book actually in 2019 and then just revised it in 2024 and added my short film, The Caregiver, as a bonus. So you can go on my website, marabellallc.com, and find the book there as well. And it's available on most platforms. The thing about that, having no regrets, is is one of the powerful lessons that I learned. Because you don't get a do-over. You do what you can, and not everyone can do everything. And so the whole thing about guilt, I grew up with guilt, so as an Italian and Catholic, so there we go.
Oh,
Yeah. So having no regrets is a wonderful thing, because I don't like guilt. Kath, can you give us some context for your caregiving experience?
Well, in 2003, my mother had been going through some testing, and she was diagnosed with small cell cancer. They knew it was aggressive, they just couldn't give her a timeline. And the last place she wanted to be was in a home or hospital. So, being the only daughter, um, my dad relied on me to be the one and only. I was fortunate. My one brother, they had in laws' quarters at my parents' house, and my one brother did live there, and his wife was phenomenal. Um, from diagnosis to death, we had 12 weeks with my mom, and I couldn't have asked for any more. The problem was for me, I did not have the opportunity to grieve because if I showed any emotion, my father would say to me, "You can't do that. I need you to be strong." So that was a difficult process for me. And he had not been well, but for whatever reason, bounced back while my mom was going through this. And about a year after she died, um, he started having additional problems. And for 5 years, we went through amputations and wound care and dialysis until he asked one day if he could go see my mom. So that, and Amanda, when you said about the no regrets and how fulfilling it was to watch them live those last months, days, weeks, whatever it was, we had 9 days of anywhere from 50 to 100 people coming in and out of the house just to say hello to my dad, to spend minutes with him, to bring a meal. And the fortunate part for me is I got to photograph a lot of that because I'm a picture taker and a memory carrier. So that was the good part. Of all of it, I think the hardest part was the fact that my mother's 90-year-old mother was still alive. And it got to the point where I could not tell her that my dad passed away because she hadn't grasped over 6 years that her daughter had passed away. So, unfortunately, through the whole thing, we kind of brought each other down, and she had to go live with another family member. She only lived a couple doors. I was trying to keep her in her home as long as possible. And after 96 years, she lived in a home for 4 years, and she did live to see her 100th birthday. She just didn't remember who any of us were. So, definitely an experience. You know, you learn a lot of medical terms, medical care, because my dad didn't want anyone else coming in the house to do anything. So I had to learn wound care, and I had to learn the 7 different diets that had to be followed for a kidney dialysis patient. So it was definitely a learning experience.
Thanks, Kath.
Mhm.
The grieving piece is really resonates with me. Um, Similarly, not having the opportunity because mom passed, then dad passed. So you kind of have to catch up. But I added a chapter for this new edition on what I'm calling after caring, because I don't think we look at that, and I don't know that it's not something we really relish looking at, what happens after caring. after our caregiving role is completed. So, pardon me. So, what I learned is it was really important to think about that, and includes grief. It includes looking forward. It includes having a sense of, what fills your life now, when you spend a lot of your life primarily as the caregiver, and then there's no one to care for, except yourself. Chris, how about for you?
Yeah, I've probably got a little bit unusual situation comparatively speaking, but my dad turned 95 last fall, and right about that time, things had deteriorated. He had been fighting prostate cancer for a long time, and was pretty well controlled. And as the doctor told me, Chris, any man over 90 has prostate cancer. It's just a matter of how far along it is and how quickly it's growing. So it kind of exploded at that point, and it was no longer under control and started spreading places. We got him radiation and things like that. But because I was down here, the burden that created to come up there, and it was mostly the way the healthcare system works, that you have to advocate and coordinate, and you can literally do that full time without a problem if you want to or need to, and you start shuttling him places, doctor's appointments, follow-ups, testing, the radiation treatments. Luckily, at that point, I had already coordinated home care, and then nurses coming in, a whole variety of things going on. But that created problems of its own, coordination things, communication, things missing, just those kinds of things all were happening all at once. And what happened was, long story short, he got scared, and I mean just really scared of being in the house alone at night, because 24-hour nursing would have been just, so expensive, and he didn't want that. So he started getting really fearful. And then when I convinced him to shift from that mode into assisted living with step up care, including hospice, uh, he was mad at me for only about 3 or 4 days. And he yelled at me, "Don't you sell that house. Don't you do this. Don't you do that." 4 days later, Mr. Resilient, I now call him, he was like, he was so happy there. And 4 days there, because he was no longer alone. He wasn't afraid. He knew people there, and people were coming in that knew him. I mean, he knew everybody in that area because he was a teacher and then a principal in the school district for 37 years. So he knows like thousands of people. Anyway, he started getting happy and settled. Uh, and he actually said to me, "I want you to start selling everything I own now. I want you to sell my house and my car." And although it put a lot of pressure on us, my gosh, when that was all done, I basically gave him a report and said, "It's all done. All your stuff is in the bank, but you don't own anything else anymore." And that got us into this sort of steady state. But the guilt that you have from, and you talked about being Italian, that whole culture of come and see us. You go to the elders, they don't come to you. So I'm 2.5 hours away. I'm working full time. I have other family issues that came up with children, adult children. And oh man, that just became, and to this day, that's still my problem. About 7 or 8 months ago, the hospice nurses called me and said, "We're really good at telling when somebody's going to transition." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure you are. What are you trying to say?" And they're like, "Well, he's a week or so away." This is like 6 or 7 months ago. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And I start calling everybody, the funeral home, the church, everybody. And then about a week later, she says, "Well, he's having a little bit of a rebound, but that's normal before, the light bulb burns bright and then it burns out." And then 2 days, 3 days later, she goes, "No, he's like back. He's back to where he was." And I said, "Well, okay." So I'm running back and forth trying to figure out what's going on. And then he went into this steady state, and occasionally he gets all upset about thinking he's going to run out of money and they're going to kick him out. And all these depression era babies, they're all like that. And I realized I picked up some of that too. As I get closer to retirement, I think about running out of money too. So I get that paranoia that he put, but boy, oh boy, as soon as you convince him, hey, everything's okay, then you go back to this steady state. And not being alone, not coordinating all this stuff, my stress level went down hugely, and his did too. So it's been win-win. But and I also have to say, my dad had the greatest neighbors ever to come anywhere in the world. I've never seen anything like it. The things they did for him and then for us during this process were life-saving, life-saving. I would have otherwise lost my mind driving back and forth, completely exhausted between point A and point B. So sorry for the rambling, but that's the story. And he's actually got a really good shot now of making his 96th birthday in October. And I've nicknamed him Mr. Resilient. And believe me when I tell you, it fits. During COVID, he was still living at home alone. He army crawled across the floor on his elbows because his lower legs and extremities wouldn't work. He was that sick. And so I said, Dad, you are the most resilient older man I've ever met in my life. So there you go.
Thanks, Chris.
Mhm.
And it's a great segue into the next topic I'd like to ask people to weigh in on. The difficulties, whether it's guilt or whether it's logistics. I'd love for you to share what was, maybe one of the most challenging aspects of being a caregiver for you.
I can go first. I think by far the most challenging was before we transitioned to a hospice care approach, trying to get a straight answer from the medical community, and a more palliative approach. I basically had to back the oncologist into a corner to get him to say, well, if she stops the transfusions, she'll be dead in a few weeks, which is what she needed to know. The transfusions were making her sick. And so never did anybody say to her, you don't have to do that. You can choose a different way. And I didn't know anything about palliative care or hospice. So for me, that was the hardest part, was to get compassionate advice from someone who had experience in the dying process. And yeah, it was just, as a caregiver, it was really isolating.
Thank you. Others? I want to look up a book while we're talking that might, so that's why I'm looking down. Anybody else? What? Oh, there's Tommy. We'll let him in.
Mine's pretty straightforward. It's a couple of things I mentioned. It's exhaustion, and it's guilt. And I would say on any given day, the guilt was the bigger challenge, even though I was exhausted, because that just seemed to be ingrained, that you have to do more, and whatever you're doing doesn't seem like enough. Kind of gives me a little bit of a empathy for women who try to work full time outside the home and are the main caregivers of the children when they are home, always torn between where I should be putting my emphasis, and can't seem to do it all the way I want to the nth degree. And that's how I sort of felt as the remote located caregiver.
Thanks, Chris. Kathy, any thoughts?
Amanda brought something up about having to be, and Chris had also, being the advocate, getting the answers, asking the tough questions. And specifically with my dad, he would go to dialysis. Treatment was wonderful, but the girls there, they were very upbeat and positive. Phil, you ought to go and see if you qualify for a kidney transplant. My dad was 68 years old, a diabetic, and an amputee. Um, Common sense tells you he does not qualify. So I got a little angry and called the nephrologist, and I asked him point blank, and he said, Kathy, we do whatever we have to do to keep our patients' spirits up. If your dad says to me, I think I want to see if I can qualify, we're going to run him through the tests. It's going to be the reality of the results that tell him you're not a candidate. And I was the one left to tell him all this information. So it was like, you have to be the bearer of the bad news, but yet the supporter of all of it, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And that was difficult for me to manage.
I get it. Yeah, yeah, the messenger in our roles, the messenger seems to always have not such a great news to share. And yet we try to couch it or package it in ways that'll be more palatable, even to the point like what Chris was talking about, you know, the transition to an assisted living. I know that story. I know how that goes. I know how difficult it is for people of that generation to leave their home, or as I think Kathy said, to have anybody else come into their home. The book I was talking about is Etual Gawande's Being Mortal, and it talks about beautifully talks about his father, his experience with his father's passing, and it focuses more on acceptance of death and acceptance of how to make that easier for folks than it does and he's a doctor, than focusing on how to delay it and how to, remediate or mediate. I'm going to welcome our other guest, Tom Rader, and ask him to join us. So glad you were able to join us, Tom, and we'll catch you up real quickly. We have just about 15 minutes left in our conversation. So let me just ask him to unmute, and if he can.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
You sure can, Tom.
Hey, sorry, I was having some Zoom issues.
No worries.
Yeah,
Welcome.
but I could hop before.
Sure. Just tell us a little bit about if you you're welcome to put your camera on, or you're welcome to just stay audio, whatever you prefer. A little bit about your experience with caregiving and for your family.
Yeah, so I helped take care of my 84-year-old grandmother, my Nana Mary, on my mom's side, and it's been for a couple of years now since my Pop Tom passed away in 2019. So it's sort of been a team effort. I was living with her for quite a while through the pandemic, and then my dad ended up moving in because he had got a new job that was close to where my Nana lived. So I moved down to Reading. But I still go up there on the weekends. I'm actually head up there right now. Yeah, mainly what I've found is like my grandma over the years, we were best friends. I'd live around the different parts of the country. We talk on the phone all the time. We talk literally about everything. And now as she's getting older, it seems like her main thing is memory care. She's in pretty good health. I mean, she's had some issues with her eye and whatnot. But so I guess for me, it's like sometimes I find myself, I'll just sit with her, but she does her crossword puzzles, or she's clearly making a personal effort on her end to try to keep her mind sharp. And I sometimes find myself, after all these years, even running out of things to talk about with her, and I feel a lot of guilt for that. So I'm always trying to find different ways, even like through music, or a couple months ago, I just like recorded her telling stories about her life so that I can save it for my nieces when they grow up. So I guess mainly for me as a caregiver, it's been how to better handle, memory care and those kind of things that she, is clearly trying to do the same. So.
That's really, really wonderful to, to have that relationship. I think younger generations, younger than my generation, which is most everybody, younger generations, often I don't see that connection across generations. So it's really wonderful, Tom, that you have that relationship. Has anybody had some more experience with dealing with dementia or dealing with the memory issues?
I did.
Yeah.
Obviously, with my grandmother, with her getting older, she couldn't grasp the concept that my mother was even sick. I was getting 30 to 40 phone calls a day. We lived 2 doors apart. My son's, my youngest son still lived at home. He would go down there every day, sit and have iced tea and cookies with her. I would go down and take her dinner every day, just different things to try to keep her occupied. But it was there, she couldn't get past. And that was the deciding factor on which direction her memory or loss of was going.
Yeah, what I've read and what I experienced and what I see is just amazing. Tom, you mentioned the, music, and it's an incredibly powerful intervention, so to speak. It's a positive distraction. Um, and I guess what I had to learn, which was a really tough lesson, is because I can be really stubborn, is that I don't need to be right. Like whatever the conversation was about, I don't need to be right, even if I am right. It doesn't matter. What matters is there's conversation, there's dialogue, they're talking, we're just having a conversation. And why do I don't need to worry about the facts in these cases. Obviously, if we're talking about, their health care or something different, but you get what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess too, it's like she'll get very engaged. Like, when I come over, my dad's there. Like, hey, let's put a sport she likes to watch, the Phillies or the Eagles or college football, or we'll put like a show on or whatever. And but then like when I leave or my dad leaves for work or whatever, I guess, and then I'll come back to just find her TV's off. She's sitting by herself. She usually likes to do ironing and doing laundry and stuff, and she's not doing that, and she's just sitting doing her crossword puzzles. And I guess in a way, I feel bad with that because she seems as though she's so isolated, and she's not doing the activities. Obviously, we're not there, so she's not, you know what I mean? And the times, I don't know. I just would like to come back and see her still, I don't know, more upbeat when we're
more
not
engaged,
there.
more engaged. Yeah. And you can't be there 24/7. Most of us couldn't be there 24/7. And that goes back to the guilt. I mean, there's a lot of that because we care so much. I wrote this book because I think one of my motivations was I was overwhelmed and I thought, well, I have to get this out. But another part of it was I if this helps one person feel less guilty or feel or not beat themselves up as much or not be as overwhelmed or not be as clueless as I have been, then it's a successful venture to have written this book. Because I think we share a lot of similarities, even though our situations are vastly different. What the final thing I wanted to ask everyone to comment on is, we've talked about different things that are struggles or challenges for you, but what has been or what would have been the thing that helps, the thing that gets you through the guilt or gets you through the being overwhelmed or, you know, for me, I'll just share. For me, it was having this village that Chris talked about with his dad's neighbors. I, as an only child, was terrified that what this was going to be like, this experience, because I knew this is what I was, was what was in the future years ago. Um, and I can't say enough about the people in our tribe, our circle, our village, who were there for all kinds of things that I would never have expected or probably never even asked them to do. And I'm still alone doing this, and I got that, and that was challenging. But having that village of people to even just to call and say, ah, they're driving me nuts today. So how about for each of you? Was there something, if you didn't have that, was there something you would have liked to have had?
For myself, we had that, I would have liked to have had that when it was all over. It seemed like for everyone else, life got back to normal, but I couldn't move forward. So that constant interaction and reaching out or being able to call someone like you said and do that, that would have been nice. But it just, I think people were kind. They just felt like time to move on, and I couldn't. So I would think if I had to give a piece of suggestion to anyone going through caregiving, make sure you have that little village, whether it's siblings or relations, good friends, neighbors, that will be there, that you can say to them, don't leave me when it's over. I still need help.
Thanks. Thanks, Ken. Others?
Yeah, I just had this is something a little off topic. I just had a question, and I wanted to ask it in terms of advice from other people, or in your experiences. Like, my grandmother's very strong Catholic faith, and I am too. But at times I feel like, because I know someday she's going to pass, and that's something I'm grappling with, and it scares the heck out of me. And I don't know if that's something she wants to talk about, or if anybody else has experience like that, or discussing that kind of thing with the person you're caring for a loved one. But just to add, yeah, I mean, definitely the village, and my mom, my dad, and my brother are great, very supportive as well. But I just wanted to throw that out there before I forget.
Absolutely. Great question. Chris, you were going to say something maybe for the other question, and then if you want to tag on to that.
Yeah, I was going to say that if I could turn the clock back, I would probably have looked into getting a counselor early in the process. I have great respect for what transition Amanda has made into that field. The country overall is awash in anxiety and depression in general to begin with, and we're going through these very tumultuous times. And I found it overwhelming at times, and I had never ever in my life gone to a counselor or therapist, so it seemed odd to think about it. But I wish I had done that earlier in the process. It would have been a good idea. And hats off to you, Amanda, for what you do. It's more and more needed in this country. So thank you for what you're doing. The only other thing I would say is I want to say what you kind of pick up on what you said earlier, Sandy, about it doesn't matter if you win. My dad's passive aggressive nature got more accelerated at times. And I recognized it for what it was. My wife was bothered more by some of the things he said to me than maybe I was, or maybe I was just hiding it. I don't know. But sometimes those things get more pronounced, I guess, when they're going through the end of life stuff. So I have learned that I don't have to win an argument. And it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't matter that much.
Thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
The just to add a footnote, the Surgeon General last year declared loneliness an epidemic. It doesn't surprise me, and I don't believe it's just because of we're living in a post-pandemic world. I believe this disconnection started years ago, and it's currently part of my upcoming project, a documentary film. But it really has created a kind of a pall behind life. How many people experience this loneliness and disconnection, and it only can accelerate then as people age. Tom added here, have those conversations. My parents were able to plan their funerals, choose their altar servers, music, and all goes with that. And it made it much easier to send them home the way they wanted to go. Exactly. Yeah, I think the person will tell you if they want to talk about it. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, Graham, I get scared about this, but maybe if we talk about it, what do you think? Maybe she'll say, I don't want to talk about it, which is totally cool. But
Yeah.
you don't have to have a script. You can just be you, and she'll take the lead. Amanda, did
That
you want to add anything? I think you're unmuted. There you go.
There we go. Yes, I really related to when you were talking about being an only child, because in some ways it made it so much easier because I didn't have to consult anybody else as I made decisions, which was amazing. I'm watching my wife go through this now with her parents, and she has two sisters, and they are always one match away from a nuclear explosion. Um, but also, as an only child, you don't have community, you don't have support. And so, one of the things that exhausted me was keeping the family up to date. And they were all well meaning and they all wanted updates. But, from day to day, I didn't know what I was going to find when I would visit. So, what I started was a Caring Bridge page. Caring Bridge is an online website and you can post daily updates. You can post photos. People can share comments or share memories. And it was perfect because I could share what I wanted to share in my time. And, people could climb on and say, screw that nursing home, you can buy that air mattress pad or, but I didn't have to repeat myself 7 times to all the siblings and my mother's siblings. And that meant a lot to be able to know that people were up to speed, but that I didn't have to, because I didn't know what was going to come from day to day.
And just having to say it more than once is even more exhausting to have to fill everyone in. I started a Facebook page, a private group, because for the reasons you mentioned, for being able to communicate with each other, but also for safety, for people to be able to feel they can be safe spouting off about X nursing home. I don't allow anybody, no vendors are allowed in the Facebook page. It's only for people who have been caregivers or are caregivers, and you all will be invited to that page as we go forward. But yeah, it is exhausting. Any last comments or thoughts or things you wanted to add from any of the four of you? Tom, we'll start with you since we can't see you.
Yeah, no, I mean, even just this brief time is nice. I mean, I've tried therapy off and on in the past. But sometimes it's just nice to be able to discuss what you're feeling to other people. It makes you feel less isolated and all that. So I found this therapeutic in that sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Anybody? Kath, Chris, Amanda?
Chris, I just wanted to follow up on something you said about being grateful for therapists. I love that I can take what was a shitty experience for me and transition it into care. One of my favorite patient experiences was a woman who came to me and she'd been caring for her husband for about a year and a half. And she thought they had 6 to 9 months because that's all the doctors would tell her. And from the first time I met her, I was meeting her weekly. On the second week, I said, you need to go tour this hospice home right now, today. And they got 1 day of hospice care before he passed.
Oh.
And she was so angry that nobody told her how sick he really was, or that there was another way. And I was able to serve that role because I didn't have anything to gain from any of it, but just to be able to have that space to say to her, I'm going to be here when this is over. I'm going to go through it with you. I'm going to be here when it ends, and I'm going to watch you heal.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Thank you. Anybody else? I will go back to just sharing the sites. We're talking about the lessons of caring, and today in our conversation of caring for caregivers, and I really wrote the book about that, about how do we help and support family caregivers, those who are taking care of loved ones, family or close friends, however. And you can look at the new edition on Amazon, Apple, or Barnes and Noble, or through directly through there. And as I said, it has the new edition has a chapter on after caring, as well as connect to the short film I did called The Caregiver, which can inspire some conversation and discussion. So I'm so grateful for the folks today to have joined me and share your experiences with others who will watch, and I know it's going to be meaningful and helpful. And I will have more of these conversations, and you're welcome to join us, of course. So if you'd like more information, the Facebook page is called The Lessons of Caring. Just ask to join, and we'll respond pretty quickly. And that's where more conversation will go on continuously. So thank you so much to Kathy, Amanda, Chris, and Tom for being a part of this morning's discussion, today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.